Welcome to the next chapter of Mina's Star, a near-future epic about humanity's reckoning after the collapse of the insane logic of mutually assured destruction, tracing how the ruins of the nation-state order give rise to the Charter. A new consensus-driven civilization built on the principle that every life is sovereign. Lucien Vey uncovers a conspiracy linking powerful families to a hidden constellation of satellite weapons, drawing him into a perilous mission that could reveal their motives or plunge the world into chaos. Chapter 1. Amsterdam, the Netherlands, 2043. The Mina's star clip blew up the threat matrix and new assignments hit before dawn. They call it intelligence, but it's really a marketplace of souls. You trade loyalty for secrets, promises for silence, and when an asset's burned or spent, you move on without a backward glance. The winners aren't the smartest. They're the ones most willing to be inhumane. What lets Lucien Vey sleep at night isn't pride or patriotism, but the quiet hope that by playing the monster, the people he loves might be safe from one. At least that is what he tells himself. The thought is like a refrain, but he cannot fool himself. It's just a job. We wake. We use each other. We sleep. The interrogation room was in Amsterdam, less than a kilometer from Centraal Station. It was tucked behind Meme House, a 3-floor concept store themed entirely around animated internet memes. Looping videos, clashing audio, and glitchy animatronics formed a constant hum of nostalgia and overexposure. The interrogation room, masked by Meme House's sensory overload, was soundproofed, matte gray, the shape of a trapezoid, subtly narrowing toward the back to create disorientation. There was just a single lamp mounted to a ceiling track, casting sharp light over the table. Lucien Vey grimaced as he watched the Dutch police officer beat the man he'd spent 2 years observing. Lucien was a tall but stooping middle-aged man with patchy stubble, a mutilated right ear, and a discolored eye he wore like a badge. His face was memorable in all the wrong ways, useless for field work, but perfect for interrogation. A face that gave people nightmares had its uses. After the Americans betrayed the Ukrainians in the Kursk offensive by withholding critical intelligence, the European members of NATO learned their lesson. They formed NATO-E and built their own intelligence institution, the European Intelligence Command, to unify their fractured services under one roof. Sometimes it worked brilliantly. Most of the time it did not. Now, because of that failure, Lucien had one move left. He would show his beautiful face and salvage what he could. Konstantinos Arvani, third cousin of the heir to the Arvani fortune, wore a cream-colored blazer, Italian cut, its fabric crisp and rigid enough to suggest it had never seen a suitcase. Beneath it, a collarless shirt in soft pearl gray drank in the ambient light, the kind of fabric that didn't flash but whispered custom, limited run, and never on sale. His hair, sculpted with unnatural precision, held its form right up until his nose was shattered by the Dutch interrogator, blood splashing across his pristine shirt. "Sorry about the first guy," Lucien said softly, handing Konstantinos a handkerchief. "Protocol failure. You were meant to be picked up for a few questions in private." Despite the blood, Konstantinos didn't flinch. He sat in perfect stillness, his gaze fixed on Lucien, eerily calm, alert, and absolutely in control. Lucien let the silence stretch, watching the blood dry, and said, "I've worked with your family's outer structures in the European Union. The problem is people see things go sideways and assume malice. But like any large multinational family, people mess up and a family member has to come and harmonize." In the silent beat before harmonize, as if by accident, Lucien let his left hand drift forward and rest on the table. Taking a gamble, his 2 fingers tapped twice, the cadence subtle, more rhythm than code, more timing than precision. It was something Lucien had seen twice, both times caught in archival drone footage of Arvani delegates breaking an impasse at a critical moment. It was a pattern that implied layered meaning that the analysis team believes was a signal that the messenger is to be trusted. Through a web of shell companies, your family recently acquired components critical to the continent's shared defense network, Lucien said, his tone measured as he studied Konstantinos. The member states rarely agree on anything, yet they do when it threatens everyone's security. So why work against them now? Konstantinos, shackled to the metal table, gave a faint, mocking smile. Last I checked, the European Union still claims to follow its own laws. If no laws were broken in these supposed purchases, what exactly are we doing here? My family cares only about our wealth. If your employers want the components, they can buy them. He leaned back and brushed his fingers through the air as if swatting a fly. I throw parties and I set trends. Logistics is beneath me, but both men knew that was a lie. You know the components have already been shipped to Russia, China, or maybe Iran. And we know they were yours because someone always screws up. We have a recorded call from one of your very confused brokers demanding that her bonus not be affected by the losses she blamed on you. Lucien paused and carefully said, You know we are looking for more stealth satellites like Mina's star, so why are you trying to prevent us? Konstantinos said nothing. He gave no sign of recognition, not a twitch or a blink. But Lucien had been watching Konstantinos for 2 years, and the silence before his answer was half a second too long. Lucien had him. Then, softly, as if asking for a menu, Do you have a pen and paper? Lucien blinked in surprise. He called for a pen and paper while Konstantinos tilted his shackled hands toward Lucien. As staff brought in the material, Lucien unshackled Konstantinos, who instantly exploded into motion. Prepared for aggression, Lucien stepped back but created the gap Konstantinos needed. With chilling precision, Konstantinos plunged a custody pen into his upper inner thigh. With inhuman determination, he drove the pen through fabric and skin and muscle with short, repeated plunges as he searched for his femoral artery. Realizing the custody pen, which was designed to collapse, must have a metal core, Lucien grabbed Konstantinos' arm while the Dutch police rushed in to assist. Konstantinos remained eerily calm as he maintained eye contact with Lucien. When it hit fast. A hot pulse of blood surged out, arcing across the steel table before soaking the floor as Konstantinos ripped out the pen. Futilely, Lucien shoved hemostatic gauze into the wound and leaned his weight on it. An agent threw a tourniquet high on the thigh and cranked it tight. Breathing quick, shallow breaths, Konstantinos kept his gaze on Lucien as he bled out. In his last delirious moment, his mouth trembled, and he whispered something faint with a note of regret. The internal review suite could have passed for any government conference room, its walls a dull institutional beige, the carpet worn thin by decades of anonymous footsteps, and the battered conference table showing the scuffs and nicks of 1,000 meetings. Seated across from Lucien were 3 figures: Director of Strategic Intelligence Matthias Wendt, a sharp-edged professional with a reputation for unsentimental competence; Chief of Staff Vilis Ozolins, a Latvian political appointee from the government in exile noted for his rare ability to curb internal politicking; and Deputy Director General Alvaro Serrano, the ambitious bureaucrat eager to gut strategic intelligence and roll it into other branches under his portfolio. "Tell me, Lucien," Wendt said, with the slow, pointed neutrality of a disappointed headmaster. "When exactly did you decide that giving Arvani a pen was tactically sound?" Lucien didn't answer. His hands were folded, thumb pressed hard to knuckle. Across the table, Wendt's silver hair caught the dim light like polished wire. His suit was charcoal wool, and his English, colored by a Dutch accent, was untouched by decades in Brussels intelligence circles. He was the type who wore cufflinks with crests and still called intelligence the work. Wendt tapped a dossier hard, like a gavel. Third cousin or not, Konstantinos was still an Arvani with diplomatic immunity, and now he's bleeding out on every back channel like a goddamned martyr. Lucien let out a breath. Immunity doesn't cover operational acts, sir. He responded to the signal tap used by the illicit family wing principals. It wasn't shame that killed him. Based on his reaction to the accusation, he knew we had him. Wendt scoffed, low and bitter. Your timing is precisely what you always sell me when a theory breaks containment. You don't have a confession, Lucien. You don't even have a motive. You have a dead man who shouldn't have been interrogated and a smuggled components list with a tenuous link. The only thing you've got? Wendt leaned in, voice low. Layered meaning, Lucien. That's all you've got. After a tense minute, Chief of Staff Ozelins cleared his throat and nonchalantly said, As of today, the investigation into the supply chain disruption affecting the potential kinetic bombardment detection is suspended. The Americans claim they have the resources to pursue this investigation and will share the intelligence. At the suggestion of relying on the Americans, Lucien snorted in disbelief, and Ozelin's eyes narrowed. I don't need to remind anyone why millions, including my family, had to flee the Baltics and parts of Finland after the American betrayal that followed the events of Blue Judas. However, the Defense Council of NATO-E has decided all resources will focus on counterterrorism. We are all aware of the tit-for-tat attacks between far-right extremism and radicalized immigrant groups. Neither reflects the majority, but the number of attempts is metastasizing. After the Osi Fogadalum Testveriseg massacre at the predominantly North African daycare, there are growing rumors of reprisal. The Director General has decided that strategic intelligence will support the counterterrorism mandate. Independently, Ozelins deliberately stressed independently in response to Deputy Director General Serrano's feral grin. With the conclusion of the review, Wendt indicated that Lucien should follow as Wendt and Ozelins headed towards the Technical Intelligence Division. While heading to the TID conference room, the two spoke of bureaucratic matters such as agent transfers and budget reallocations, while Lucien worked to steady his resentment and heart rate. Then it hit him. They were talking about activity supporting the supply chain investigation. Wendt glanced back and said quietly, You reacted exactly as we intended, but now that the show is done, let's get back to work. In intelligence, when intrigue is the job, it inevitably bleeds back into office politics. The review had been another operation, and Lucien played his part perfectly. Lucien said, Right after Mina's star was spotted, the critical components were quickly relocated to less scrutinized regions. You think that's a coincidence? Wendt and Ozelins exchanged a look and Director Wendt responded, That's why you're here, Lucien. Inside the TID conference room were Wendt's most loyal agents, veterans who had sacrificed much, and like Lucien, saw the job for what it was. Lucien, what a cock-up with the pen, said Daniel Carter, a muscular man with an eye patch and a long, storied history with Lucien, shaking his head. A sharp-eyed, slim, blonde agent that exuded confidence interjected sharply, Who could have thought an Arvani scion, more at home matching handbags with scarves, would have the resolve to stab himself in the thigh with a flimsy pen and dig for his femoral artery? The room fell silent when Camille Dubois, normally Lucien's sharpest critic, spoke up in his defense. The weight of the operation left no room for rivalry. Director Wendt stepped through the quiet staff pods and onto a raised platform near the front of the room with a large screen. Chief of Staff Ozelins remained at the rear. A green light above the door blinked on, and the recorder's red indicator went dark. The doors hissed shut as the room sealed. Wendt spoke evenly, but all eyes were attentive in anticipation. Effective immediately, We are standing up a small task force to plan and execute the exfiltration of a deep cover asset named Vellum from the current cloistered environment. Access is compartmented to this room. Vellum is a long-term placement with proximity to the Mayrov inner circle. Shortly after the reported death of Konstantinos Arvani, Vellum signaled Valence 9 at 22:10 last night via the scheduled channel and requested urgent exfiltration. Valence 9, the service's top emergency code for mass casualty risk that is imminent or currently underway. One hand froze mid-note. Another clenched the chair arm. The previous Valence 9 incident was when Russia self-destructed a nuke over Chicago during the 1920s. We assess with moderate confidence that Arvani's death has pulled forward the next phase of the satellite operation associated with Mina's star. The Mirov and Arvani families are not known to collaborate. Their historical posture has been competitive, and motives for any coordination remain unclear. Wendt projected on the screen overlapping activities of both families and the global implications of coordination. Mikhail Mirov's network appears to control entities with aggregate enterprise value exceeding 1 trillion euros across chemistry, energy, post-Kessler space infrastructure, and arcology projects. Publicly, Mirov presents as a humanitarian, including high-visibility projects in Tuvalu and the charter designed, but Mirov-funded West Bank to Gaza tunnel. Internally, we assess the organization as a hierarchical criminal enterprise with discrete political influence. The screen flipped through a series of dead witnesses to incriminating crimes. The families associated with PMCs of various origins in multiple theaters. With the Mirov and Arvani connection, as well as Mina's star, a clear pattern has emerged. The screen shifted to overlays of PMC conflict zones mapped against Mirov and Arvani assets, as well as other affiliates. A quiet but unmistakable pattern emerged of a global supply chain capable of launching covert satellites like Mina's star. Director Wendt played a filtered audio clip. Linguistic identification is Tuvaluan with high confidence. The content includes an expression of love for a sister and the phrase, "The stars will bring balance." Arvani's documented biography lists him as an only child born in Athens and educated in Lausanne. As he lost lucidity, he appeared to have inadvertently switched languages. The language switch and the biographic conflict increase the probability that Konstantinos Arvani is a fabricated identity or a Mirov operative under deep cover. A quiet exfiltration remains our best prospect for clarifying the scope, intent, and tasking chain behind the satellite operation associated with Mina's star. The retrograde heliocentric orbit places Mina's star beyond conventional detection, sunward of Earth's orbital plane. That's why no one saw it coming. Lucien will take point in the exfiltration team with Daniel and Camille to support. You will be joined with 3 additional local agents. The briefing ended with the potential destructive ability of a first-strike retrograde heliocentric kinetic bombardment device. Singapore, 7 days before Tuvalu Day. Since Mikhail Mirov transformed Tuvalu from a seasonally submerged microstate into the wealthiest nation on Earth per capita, anchored by a €100 billion sovereign wealth fund, Tuvaluan citizenship has become synonymous with untouchable wealth and privilege. That is, so long as Mikhail Mirov continued to serve as patron-in-chief, elected to 10-year terms in internationally verified, impeccably transparent elections. In return, his family and designated agents lived tax-free and traveled the globe with diplomatic immunity. Sovereignty purchased at the cost of less than 10% of the family's wealth. Though Tuvalu is considered a modern marvel rising from the sea, it is the embassy in Singapore that serves as its true capital. It is where every trade agreement is negotiated and every treaty signed. It is where the Tuvaluan diaspora gathers to debate legislation. It is also where the Gala of the Sea, the most extravagant fashion event on Earth, celebrates the rising power of Tuvalu. Millions watch the broadcast frame by frame to anticipate the next fashion wave, and hundreds of millions more place bets on which fashion icon wins the red carpet. And it was from this glittering chaos that Lucien Vey, Daniel Carter, and Camille Dubois were tasked with extracting vellum along with, regrettably, a cat code named Arthur Aguefort. Lucien contemplated the mission while observing the Tuvaluan embassy complex from the EIC safe room. After 6 months of shaping, the extraction operation was ready. Daniel stood over the coffee table meditatively inspecting his gear. He checked the sedative delivery system, ensured the tightly woven ventilation tubes weren't kinked, and adjusted the hidden cat carrier so it sat inconspicuously along his lower back. Camille was sitting relaxed, sipping her tea with the same unbothered poise she brought to high-pressure field extractions. She had perfected the quick-change routine needed to step in as vellum. To Lucien's far left, Rafal Radecki, a communications specialist on loan from the Asian branch of NATO-E, stood leaning against the far wall. Zero traceability was the operational goal, so Mirov Enterprises would not change their plans. Pramana Sari, a brilliant doctor turned spook, had engineered DNA-matching body parts, convincing enough to be identified as Vellum's charred remains. Adewale Ajayi tapped through a diagnostic tool wirelessly connected to the drone cluster, his thumb hovering over the deploy switch, with the casual tension of someone who'd flown recon into hot zones before most of the team had learned to convincingly lie. He was also Lucien's best friend, and the only one Lucien trusted to challenge his instincts when it mattered. As subtle as a flare, Rafal called to Daniel, "Is it true what people say about your mother?" Without looking up, Daniel stopped, and soon the whole room was completely still as people held their breath. Daniel returned to his task, said, "Yes. The same as your mother. It's all true." Adewale and Pramana grunted, but Rafal pressed. Was she really the F-35 pilot who said, "Fuck America," when the Americans refused to load targeting data, then flew into the Baltics anyways? Daniel never looked up, but Camille said, "Yes." She died in the opening moments of Blue Judas. Trapped in the Baltics afterwards, his father spent a month ambushing Russian convoys trying to stop the genocide targeting Estonians. His father died there as well. Adewale was there. Adewale kept his eyes on them and let a small smile rise. "The one time I choked a man to death was a Russian conscript drone operator who laughingly targeted a hospital. I am proud of that." Even Lucien smiled at that. Pramana was a graduate student at Tallinn University. She escaped on an inflatable raft. Pramana stared at the floor tile until her voice settled, and in a flat tone said, "Helsinki was just as bad when the Russians came for it." Camille smoothed a crease on her sleeve. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "I lost my family in Chicago, and everyone knows what happened to Lucien." No one spoke as attention gathered on Lucien, who continued to look out the window. Rafal met each of their eyes and said, "My twin sister and I were hunted by an FPV drone. The Russians turned on their speakers so we could hear them telling us to run faster. We were 6. Hearing your mother's words replayed on social media gave me hope. Fuck the Russians and the Americans." Daniel stood up looking Rafal in the eyes and after a moment said, "Fuck the Russians and the Americans." Lucien turned toward the group. "I was captured by Russians during the Baltic invasion. They threw me in a pit and mutilated each prisoner. The world's silence after Mali, Syria, and Ukraine only taught them they could. Eyes were gouged, tongues ripped out. But in the middle of the night, Russians fighting against the Putin regime came back for us, defying orders. People are the same everywhere. It's governments that commit atrocities, and borders that let them endure." During a brief pause, Pramana murmured softly, "Knowledge for everyone." Briefing starts now. The mission is to extract Vellum and Arthur from the Tuvaluan embassy during the gala, because that is the only time Vellum will be outside the total control of the embassy. Daniel grumbled softly. Stupid cat mission. Lucien let it pass. Tuvalu's embassy chose Queenstown over a good-class bungalow. They built a mixed-use complex that now houses displaced families in free apartments, and the embassy sits beneath it in an underground facility, sized for about 300 staff to maintain security. Government personnel sign 5-year, all-expenses-paid contracts, but must remain sequestered. Any trip outside is escorted, and security controls all social contact. Pramana let out a weary breath at the thought of enduring so much discomfort. In addition to sequestering staff, the embassy runs sensitive compartmented information facility-grade controls. There is no radio frequency inside the space. Each person wears 2 cross-authenticating hardware tokens that store a behavioral profile trained on months of telemetry. Access checks occur at portals and workstations. Readers take a short snapshot of ECG variability on contact pads, capture a near-IR vein map, and sample gait on force plates, then compare the sample to the behavior profile locally. Minor drift is learned weekly, while deviations trigger step-up challenges. Missed check-ins, token removal, or signs of distress lock doors, drop terminals to read only, and alert security. But every security system has a flaw. EIC has infiltrated critical supply chains with engineered flaws Vellum has taken advantage of to acquire terabytes of data, including plans about Mina's star. Plans we intend to learn without Mirov Enterprises realizing. Sound off, Rolls, Lucien said, looking at Daniel, who stood and rubbed the back of his neck. I am on cat duty. Primary is extracting the cat and keeping it alive so Vellum doesn't go rogue. Lucien nodded. She made it clear the cat keeps her sane. He gestured to Camille. As cover, I posed as one of the many fashion consultants. I steered the event planning team to hold a masquerade at the Capella Singapore. A security blind spot will be created in the privacy areas on the islet off of Palawan Beach, reserved for gala guests only. Adewale raised an eyebrow. Embassy staff are monitored at all times. We accounted for that, Camille said. There's a 30-second drone patrol handover by the islet. Lucien distracts the guard. In that window, I quick change into Vellum. Lucien extracts the real Vellum, and Daniel extracts the cat. She gave Daniel a quick wink. Rafal followed Camille. Adewale's drones are lighter than air and fly silently. I will be pointing my laser at the drone, which will relay one-way messages so long as you are in line of sight. No radio frequency chatter. Lucien at the hour. Daniel at 15. Camille at 30. Pramana at 45. If you need to send a message back, adjust your mask or use the silent lip code. After the swap, Camille enters the limo followed by the staged crash and burn, leaving behind the decoy remains. Lucien nods to each team member, confident that each will play their parts. After the exfiltration, each team member has separate extraction routes. We have 1 more week until the operation is live. Author's note. This novel began as a response to 2 troubling global trends. The first is the growing comfort with nuclear appeasement. The second is the steady rise of global political violence. Through this story, I wanted to explore the dangers of both while offering a possible path forward through the idea of the Charter, a political framework built to redefine what a state can be. This book is the first in a planned 9-part series. The first trilogy begins in a near-future world grounded in realism and science, and its later volumes move beyond Earth to the cloud cities of Venus and the scavenger worlds of dead civilizations, where technology has become indistinguishable from magic. The second trilogy carries these ideas into a fantasy realm. The third trilogy unites both universes into one. The Charter and its principles form the through line of the entire series, expressed in its central creed. Every life is sovereign. If you have listened this far, thank you. Please consider liking or subscribing to help this story and its message reach more people.